The neighbor's secret. I had always been the curious type, the kind of person who couldn't help but wonder about the lives of those around me. So when I moved into my new house and heard the rumors about my neighbor, Mr. Blackwell, I couldn't resist the urge to learn more. They said he was a recluse, a man who rarely left his home and was rarely seen in the daylight. The locals whispered tales of his peculiar habits and strange visitors, but I brushed it off as small-town gossip. Little did I know my curiosity would lead me down a path of unimaginable horror. It all started innocently enough. I had been living in my new home for a few months, and I'd exchanged only brief pleasantries with Mr. Blackwell. He seemed harmless enough, if not a bit eccentric. But as time passed, my curiosity grew stronger. I began to watch his house from my window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious man. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, I saw a flicker of movement in Mr. Blackwell's window. My heart raced with excitement as I focused on his house, trying to see more. It was then that I noticed the faint glow of candlelight from within. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate further. I told myself it was just a harmless peek into the life of my enigmatic neighbor. I waited until the cover of darkness, then slipped out of my house and into Mr. Blackwell's backyard. I peered through his window, my heart pounding in my chest. What I saw inside sent a shiver down my spine. Mr. Blackwell was standing in the center of his dimly lit living room, surrounded by candles. But it was what he held in his hands that filled me with dread. A wooden box, ornately decorated with strange symbols. As I watched in horror, Mr. Blackwell began to chant in a language I couldn't understand. The candles flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows on the walls. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me, even as a sense of foreboding washed over me. Just then, the chanting reached a crescendo, and Mr. Blackwell opened the wooden box. Out of it emerged a grotesque, otherworldly creature, a thing with too many eyes, too many limbs, and a gaping maw filled with rows of serrated teeth. I recoiled in terror, my heart pounding in my chest. Mr. Blackwell began to feed the creature, offering it chunks of raw meat. The abomination devoured the offerings eagerly, its eyes fixed on its master. The room filled with a sickening metallic smell, and I fought to suppress a gag. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and a sense of dread washed over me. I knew I had to get away, to put as much distance between myself and that unholy ritual as possible. I retreated from Mr. Blackwell's yard, my heart racing. For days I couldn't shake the horrifying images from my mind. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, haunted by the realization that my seemingly harmless neighbor was involved in something beyond my comprehension. I contemplated reporting what I had seen to the authorities, but who would believe such a tale? Then, one night, as I lay in bed, I heard a soft, scratching sound at my bedroom window. My blood ran cold as I saw Mr. Blackwell's face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and manic. He was grinning, revealing teeth that were far too sharp and unnatural. I screamed and scrambled out of bed, rushing to lock all the doors and windows. But no matter how securely I locked them, I could still hear the scratching, the relentless persistence of my neighbor. He whispered my name through the glass, his voice a chilling, guttural rasp. I knew then that Mr. Blackwell's secrets were not meant to be uncovered, that his malevolent intentions were now focused on me. I had become entangled in something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. And as I huddled in my darkened home, I realized that my curiosity had led me into the clutches of a neighbor whose true nature was a nightmare beyond belief. Days turned into restless nights as I barricaded myself inside my home, my mind tormented by the sinister specter of Mr. Blackwell. His relentless whispers and unnerving scratching at my windows had driven me to the brink of madness. I contacted the local authorities, desperate for help, but their responses were dismissive, convinced that I was succumbing to paranoia. In their eyes, Mr. Blackwell was just an eccentric recluse, not the nightmarish figure I had witnessed. I knew I had to confront my neighbor and expose the horrors that lurked within his house, but the fear that gripped me was paralyzing. Each night, as I cowered in my dimly lit bedroom, I could feel his malevolent presence drawing closer, inch by inch, as if he were slowly closing in on me. One evening, I mustered the courage to venture outside, determined to confront Mr. Blackwell and put an end to the terror that had consumed my life. The night was dark and cloudy, and the air was thick with an eerie silence. I approached his house cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. As I neared his front door, I could hear faint, unsettling sounds emanating from within. Whispers, unnatural hisses, and the guttural cries of an otherworldly creature. I took a deep breath and pounded on the door, shouting for him to answer. The door creaked open slowly, revealing Mr. Blackwell's haggard face. His eyes were bloodshot, and his once neat hair was now matted and disheveled. His lips curled into a malevolent smile as he greeted me with a disturbing calmness. "Ah, my curious neighbor," he rasped, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "I've been expecting you." With a sudden burst of strength, I shoved my way into his house, determined to confront the horrors that lurked within. The interior was a nightmarish tableau of chaos, with candles casting eerie shadows and strange symbols etched on the walls. Mr. Blackwell's unholy creation, the grotesque creature from my earlier nightmares, lurked in the corner of the room. Its eyes fixed on me, and its maw opened wide, revealing row upon row of razor-sharp teeth. "You shouldn't have come here," Mr. Blackwell whispered, his voice a chilling incantation. "You were never meant to uncover my secrets." I demanded answers, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. What was the creature? What dark forces had he harnessed? But Mr. Blackwell only laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You see, my dear neighbor, some secrets are best left buried," he hissed. With a sudden, unnatural agility, Mr. Blackwell lunged at me, his eyes filled with a madness that defied explanation. I stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding his grasp. The grotesque creature followed suit, its limbs stretching impossibly as it advanced. In a desperate bid for survival, I grabbed a nearby candlestick and swung it wildly, shattering the glass and igniting the curtains. Flames engulfed the room, casting a hellish light on the chaos that surrounded me. The creature screeched in agony, its flesh melting away in the inferno. Mr. Blackwell's maniacal laughter echoed through the flames as he was consumed by the fire, his body contorting and twisting until he was nothing but a charred, grotesque husk. I managed to escape the burning house, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and relief. The fire raged on, consuming everything in its path, until Mr. Blackwell's abominable secrets were reduced to ashes. In the aftermath, the authorities finally took my claims seriously, investigating the scene of the fire and the horrors that had unfolded within. They found no trace of the grotesque creature or any evidence of Mr. Blackwell's nefarious rituals. To this day, the memory of my creepy neighbor and the horrors that lurked within his house haunts my nightmares. I've learned that some secrets are best left undiscovered, that curiosity can lead us down dark and terrifying paths. And as I gaze upon the charred ruins of Mr. Blackwell's house, I'm reminded that evil can wear a neighbor's face, and the horrors that dwell next door may be far worse than we can ever imagine. In the years that followed, the memory of Mr. Blackwell and the horrors I had witnessed gradually faded into the recesses of my mind. I tried my best to put the past behind me, focusing on rebuilding my life and finding solace in the light of day. But there are some scars that never truly heal, and the darkness I had encountered that fateful night continued to haunt my dreams. I became a firm believer that there are forces beyond our understanding, lurking in the shadows, and that some secrets are better left untouched. As time went on, my neighborhood returned to a sense of normalcy, the whispers of my creepy neighbor's deeds becoming nothing more than local legend. The house was never rebuilt, standing as a haunting reminder of the horrors that had occurred within its walls. And yet, even now, as I gaze upon the empty lot where Mr. Blackwell's house once stood, I can't help but wonder if the malevolent force that had consumed him still lingers, waiting for another curious soul to stumble upon its dark secrets. The memory serves as a chilling reminder that evil can reside in the most unexpected of places, and that the line between curiosity and terror is often thinner than we dare to imagine. The horrors of that night will forever remain etched in my mind, a cautionary tale of the dangers that can lurk behind the facade of a seemingly harmless neighbor. The neighbor next door. It was a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other's name, where white picket fences and well-manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see. I had always taken comfort in the familiarity of my surroundings, but that sense of security was about to be shattered by the arrival of a new neighbor. His name was Mr. Thornton, a tall, wiry man with a demeanor that sent shivers down my spine from the moment I met him. He moved into the old Victorian house next door, a house that had stood empty for as long as I could remember. The locals whispered stories of the house being haunted, and I couldn't help but wonder if Mr. Thornton knew what he was getting into. As weeks turned into months, it became apparent that Mr. Thornton was not like the other neighbors. He rarely left his house during the day, and when he did, it was always under the cover of darkness. His windows remained perpetually shut and covered with heavy curtains, shielding his home from prying eyes. My curiosity got the best of me, and I began to watch Mr. Thornton's house from my bedroom window, hoping to catch a glimpse of his peculiar activities. It was during one of these late-night observations that I saw something that chilled me to the bone. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow on the neighborhood. As I peered through my window, I saw Mr. Thornton emerge from his house, carrying a large sack over his shoulder. He moved with a purpose, his steps deliberate and calculated. My heart raced as I watched him disappear into the woods behind his property. Unable to resist the urge to uncover the mystery that surrounded him, I decided to follow him, keeping a safe distance to avoid being detected. The woods were thick with darkness, the branches of ancient trees gnarled and twisted. The sound of my footsteps on fallen leaves echoed ominously through the night. I watched as Mr. Thornton reached a clearing, where a strange, eerie light emanated from a circle of stones. In the center of the circle lay the sack, and my heart sank as I realized its gruesome contents, a lifeless body bloodied and mangled. My breath caught in my throat as Mr. Thornton began to chant in a language I couldn't understand, his voice a haunting melody that seemed to resonate with the very earth. The ground trembled beneath my feet, and I watched in horror as the lifeless body began to twitch and convulse. Then, with a sickening crunch, the body twisted and contorted, reshaping itself into a grotesque, otherworldly form. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen, its limbs elongated, its eyes empty voids of darkness. It turned its gaze toward Mr. Thornton, a look of reverence in its twisted features. My mind reeled as I realized I was witnessing a nightmarish ritual, a dark and unholy pact between man and monster. I had stumbled upon a secret so horrifying that it defied all reason. In that moment, my foot snapped a twig, the sound piercing the silence like a gunshot. Mr. Thornton's head snapped in my direction, his eyes locking onto mine with a malevolence that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned and fled, my heart pounding in my chest, as I raced through the woods, desperate to escape the nightmare that had unfolded before me. Behind me, I could hear the creature's unnatural cries, drawing closer with each passing moment. I burst out of the woods and into the safety of my own backyard, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I dared not look back, too afraid of what I might see. I locked myself in my house, trembling with fear, as I realized the true horror of my neighbor next door. Days turned into sleepless nights as I lived in terror of what I had witnessed. I knew I had to do something to expose Mr. Thornton's dark secret, but who would believe such a story? The authorities would surely dismiss me as mad. Then, one night as I lay in bed, I heard a soft scraping sound at my bedroom window. My blood ran cold as I saw Mr. Thornton's face, twisted into a malevolent grin, peering through the glass. He whispered my name, his voice a chilling, guttural rasp. I screamed and scrambled out of bed, rushing to lock all the doors and windows. But no matter how securely I locked them, I could still hear the scraping, the relentless persistence of my neighbor next door. His whispers grew louder, his voice filled with madness. I knew then that Mr. Thornton's malevolent intentions were now focused on me. that I had become the target of a horror beyond my wildest nightmares. The neighbor next door was not what he seemed, and the secrets he held were darker and more sinister than I could have ever imagined. For days, I barricaded myself inside my home, living in constant fear of Mr. Thornton's relentless presence outside my windows. Sleep became an elusive luxury, and the boundary between wakefulness and nightmares blurred as the days turned into a never-ending nightmare. I contacted the local authorities, desperate for help, but my pleas were met with skepticism. They dismissed my claims as the ramblings of a paranoid mind, convinced that my neighbor next door was nothing more than an eccentric recluse. With each passing day, I could feel Mr. Thornton's malevolence growing stronger, his whispers more insistent. He would taunt me, revealing knowledge of my deepest fears and secrets, as if he could peer into the very depths of my soul. One fateful night, unable to endure the torment any longer, I made a decision. I couldn't rely on the authorities to save me. I had to confront the neighbor next door and expose the horrors that lurked within his house. With trembling hands, I ventured into his yard, my heart pounding in my chest. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that seemed to reach out for me. Mr. Thornton's house loomed before me, its windows dark and foreboding. I entered the house, my steps echoing through the empty corridors. The air was heavy with an unnatural chill, and I could hear the faint sound of whispered incantations coming from deep within the bowels of the house. As I descended into the basement, the source of the eerie chants became clear. Mr. Thornton stood in the center of a circle, surrounded by strange symbols etched into the floor. Before him lay a grotesque altar adorned with candles and relics of unspeakable horror. I confronted him, demanding answers about the monstrous pact he had made and the torment he had inflicted upon me. Mr. Thornton's eyes glinted with a malevolent glee as he revealed his true nature. A servant of ancient malevolent forces, a bringer of chaos and despair. In a nightmarish crescendo, Mr. Thornton unleashed the full extent of his dark powers. The room trembled, and the walls seemed to close in around me. The very air crackled with malevolence as he summoned forth nightmarish creatures from the abyss. But I refused to succumb to his terror. With every ounce of strength and willpower, I fought back, confronting the horrors that assailed me with unyielding determination. The battle between light and darkness raged on, the basement becoming a battleground of epic proportions. In the end, it was a sacrifice I made, a sacrifice that cost me dearly, that shattered Mr. Thornton's hold on the malevolent forces he had unleashed. The basement was consumed by a blinding, searing light, and the horrors that had plagued me were banished to the depths from whence they came. I emerged from the ordeal, battered and bruised, but victorious. Mr. Thornton was no more, his malevolent presence vanquished. The house next door stood empty once again, a solemn reminder of the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. The authorities, upon investigating the scene, could find no trace of Mr. Thornton or the nightmarish creatures he had summoned. To them, it remained an unsolvable mystery, a story too bizarre to believe. I moved away from that accursed place, leaving behind the horrors of the neighbor next door. The scars of that ordeal would forever mark my soul, a chilling reminder that darkness can reside in the most unexpected of places and that the line between reality and nightmare is far thinner than we dare to imagine. The shadows next door. It was a picturesque neighborhood, with charming houses lined up like soldiers on either side of the street. I had always admired the tranquil beauty of our little community until the day the Smiths moved in next door. Mr. and Mrs. Smith were an elderly couple, their faces etched with wrinkles that spoke of a lifetime of experiences. They seemed friendly enough, always waving with toothless smiles whenever they saw me. However, there was something off about them, something that sent shivers down my spine whenever I passed by their house. My unease only grew as the days turned into weeks. There was an unsettling energy that seemed to radiate from their home, a heaviness that clung to the air like a damp fog. I would often catch glimpses of strange shadows moving behind their curtains, strange silhouettes that made my skin crawl. One evening, as darkness began to envelop our quiet neighborhood, I was jolted awake by a series of loud, rhythmic thumps. I stumbled out of bed, my heart racing, and followed the sound to my bedroom window, which overlooked the Smiths' backyard. My heart sank as I saw Mr. Smith standing there, a shovel in his hand, digging a deep hole in the moonlit earth. Beside him lay a large burlap sack, twitching and writhing as if it contained something alive. My mind raced with 1,000 terrifying possibilities. I couldn't look away as Mr. Smith finally finished his grim task and lowered the sack into the freshly dug hole. He said something in a language I couldn't understand, his voice filled with a strange, unearthly resonance. The earth seemed to tremble in response, and the ground swallowed the sack whole. I watched in horror as Mr. Smith patted down the soil and returned to the house, leaving me with the unsettling feeling that I had witnessed something unspeakable. The next morning, I couldn't shake the dreadful images from my mind. I knew I had to investigate, to uncover the truth about the Smiths and the sinister ritual I had witnessed. With trembling hands, I slipped into their backyard, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood before the freshly filled grave, my hands trembling as I reached down and began to dig. The soil was cold and damp, and the stench of decay filled the air as I unearthed the burlap sack. What I saw inside sent a chill down my spine, a lifeless body, pale and contorted in a grotesque manner. My breath caught in my throat as I realized the horrifying truth. The Smiths were not what they seemed, and their home concealed secrets too dark to fathom. The memory of that gruesome discovery haunted my every waking moment. The days that followed were a living nightmare. I couldn't escape the feeling that the Smiths were aware of my intrusion, that they were watching my every move with malevolent intent. The shadows in their windows seemed to grow darker and more sinister with each passing night. One evening, as I lay in bed, paralyzed by fear, I heard the soft, haunting strains of music drifting through my window. It was a mournful melody, played on an instrument I couldn't identify. The music was hypnotic, drawing me out of bed and toward the source. I followed the sound to the Smith's house, my steps guided by an otherworldly compulsion. The music led me to their basement door, which stood slightly ajar, inviting me to descend into the depths of their dark secrets. As I entered the basement, the music grew louder, and I was greeted by a sight that will haunt me until my dying day. Mrs. Smith stood before an altar, her frail form bathed in the eerie glow of candles. Beside her lay a lifeless body, its skin pallid and mottled. She turned to me, her eyes empty voids of darkness, and welcomed me with a chilling smile. "You're just in time for the ritual," she whispered, her voice like a spectral echo. I tried to run, to escape the horrifying scene unfolding before me, but my body refused to obey. I was paralyzed, a helpless witness to the malevolent ceremony that played out before my eyes. The shadows in the basement seemed to come alive, swirling and coalescing into grotesque, nightmarish forms. They whispered secrets of ancient eldritch horrors and promised unspeakable torment. I felt their icy fingers wrap around my soul, pulling me into a nightmarish abyss. But just as I teetered on the brink of madness, a blinding light filled the room, banishing the shadows and breaking their hold on me. It was the arrival of dawn, the pure, cleansing light of day that saved me from the clutches of darkness. I stumbled out of the basement and into the safety of the morning sun, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and relief. The Smiths' house remained shrouded in darkness, their sinister secrets concealed once more. I reported what I had seen to the authorities, but when they arrived at the Smiths' home, it was as if the malevolent presence had never existed. The house stood empty, devoid of any signs of the horrors that had transpired within its walls. To this day, I live with the knowledge that the Smiths' malevolence may one day return, that the darkness that lurked within their home may resurface to claim new victims. The memory of that creepy, scary neighbor still haunts my nightmares, a reminder that evil can reside next door, hidden behind closed doors and secrets too terrifying to comprehend. In the years that followed, I moved away from that accursed neighborhood, trying to put the horrors of the Smiths and their malevolent rituals behind me. I searched for peace and solace in a new place, far removed from the sinister shadows that had once loomed next door. But some scars run deeper than the passage of time. and the memory of the Smiths' malevolence haunted my every waking moment. I became obsessed with understanding the dark forces that had consumed them, delving into books and research in search of answers. As I pieced together the fragments of their disturbing legacy, I discovered that the Smiths were not the only ones to have practiced such nightmarish rituals. There were tales of ancient cults and sinister cabals, of eldritch beings and cosmic horrors that lurked beyond the veil of reality. I realized that the darkness that had taken root in the Smiths' home was part of a larger, more malevolent tapestry, a tapestry that spanned the ages and reached into the very heart of human fear and superstition. Haunted by the knowledge of what I had witnessed and driven by an insatiable curiosity, I dedicated my life to unraveling the mysteries of the supernatural. I became a hunter of the unknown, a seeker of truth in a world where reality and nightmare often blurred. In the end, I may never truly escape the horrors of that creepy, scary neighbor next door, but I have found a purpose in confronting the darkness that lies hidden in the shadows. And as I face the mysteries that still elude me, I do so with the hope that one day I may shed light on the malevolent forces that seek to ensnare us all.